CEO Jennifer had always been professional and distant. Her announcement at the company picnic revealed a secret that changed how we all saw our workplace forever. I was standing near the dessert table, trying to balance a paper plate loaded with potato salad and trying not to drop my soda when Jennifer walked up to the makeshift stage. The whole company was scattered across the park pavilion, families mingling with coworkers, kids running around with balloons tied to their wrists. It was one of those perfect Saturday afternoons where everyone seemed relaxed for once. Jennifer looked different that day. Her usually perfect hair was slightly messed up and she kept fidgeting with her hands. She'd been our CEO for 3 years and I'd maybe spoken to her directly 5 times total. She was the kind of boss who knew everyone's name but kept conversations strictly professional. No small talk, no personal details, just business. When she tapped the microphone, the feedback screech made everyone wince and turn toward the stage. The chatter died down gradually as people realized something was happening. I found myself moving closer, drawn by something in her expression that I'd never seen before. Vulnerability, maybe. She started talking and her voice was shaky in a way that made my stomach clench. She told us about her struggle with alcoholism, how it had been going on for years, how she'd been drinking during work hours. The silence that fell over the crowd was deafening. I could hear a kid crying somewhere in the distance and the sound of traffic from the nearby road, but nobody at the picnic was making a sound. My mind immediately flashed to all those afternoon meetings where she'd seemed a little off, those times when her emails came at weird hours with strange typos, the way she sometimes stumbled over words during presentations. Things that I'd brushed off as stress or tiredness suddenly took on a completely different meaning. She kept going, apologizing to everyone, talking about how her addiction had affected company decisions. I thought about the layoffs last year, the budget cuts that seemed to come out of nowhere, the projects that got canceled without explanation. My heart was racing as I started connecting dots I'd never even noticed before. The most crushing part was when she started talking about how her drinking had hurt people's careers. I watched my coworkers' faces, saw the same realization hitting them that was hitting me. We'd all complained about unfair treatment, missed promotions, weird management decisions. Now we were finding out it might have been because our boss was struggling with something none of us had recognized. She announced she was entering rehab and stepping down immediately. The weight of it hit everyone at once. People started looking around at each other, probably thinking the same thing I was thinking about what this meant for our jobs, our security, our future. But Jennifer seemed genuinely sorry. She promised to make amends, talked about taking responsibility for everything. There was something so raw about watching this powerful woman break down in front of all of us. I felt angry and sad and confused all at the same time. Then something shifted. Her posture changed, her voice got steadier, and she dropped a bomb that nobody saw coming. It was all fake. Every single word. She revealed it was a social experiment designed by corporate headquarters to test employee loyalty and see who would spread gossip versus offer support. She'd been studying our workplace culture this whole time, analyzing how we'd react to a crisis like this. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't shocked sympathy anymore, it was pure stunned disbelief. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The emotional roller coaster of the last 10 minutes crashed into a wall of betrayal and confusion. But then she kept talking and it got worse. Several people had already failed the test spectacularly. While she'd been giving her fake confession, some employees had immediately started texting people outside the company. She had people monitoring social media and tracking who was sharing information in real time. I watched as she called out specific behaviors she'd observed just in those few minutes. Someone had posted on social media about drama at work. Others had been whispering to their spouses or texting friends. The humiliation on people's faces was unbearable to watch. Update 1. The aftermath of that revelation was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in a workplace. People didn't know how to react. Some were furious about being manipulated and studied like lab rats. Others were embarrassed about how they'd responded. A few people actually seemed impressed by the elaborate setup. I spent the rest of that weekend replaying everything in my mind. The fake vulnerability, the manufactured crisis, the way she'd made us all feel genuinely concerned for her well-being only to reveal it was all calculated. It felt like such a violation of trust, even though technically she hadn't lied about anything work-related. Monday morning was incredibly awkward. Jennifer acted like nothing had happened, back to her usual professional demeanor. But the dynamic in the office had completely changed. People were paranoid about what else might be a test. Every unusual interaction, every slightly odd email, every unexpected meeting became suspect. I found myself analyzing my own behavior from that day, wondering if I'd passed or failed her test. I hadn't texted anyone during her speech, but I'd definitely been planning to call my sister afterward to tell her about the crazy thing that happened at work. Did that make me disloyal? Was I supposed to pretend it never happened? The worst part was how it affected the way we treated each other. People became guarded, less willing to share personal thoughts or concerns. The casual conversations that used to happen naturally started feeling forced and suspicious. Nobody wanted to be the next person caught doing something that corporate deemed inappropriate. About 2 weeks later, things took another unexpected turn. A group of employees decided they weren't going to just accept what had happened. They started organizing, not quite a union but something like it. They wanted answers about what other experiments might be happening, what data was being collected about us, and what the real purpose of all this observation was. I wasn't sure how I felt about joining them. Part of me was angry enough to want to push back, but another part of me was worried about making myself a target. Jennifer had already demonstrated that she was watching us more closely than we'd ever realized. The organizing effort revealed something I hadn't expected, though. People started opening up about other weird things that had happened over the past year. Strange requests from management, unusual meetings, projects that seemed designed to test our reactions rather than accomplish anything productive. It was like we'd all been living in some kind of psychological study without realizing it. One coworker shared that she'd been asked to handle a fake customer complaint that seemed designed to see how she'd respond under pressure. Another talked about being given conflicting instructions from different managers, which now seemed like it might have been intentional. The more we compared notes, the more patterns emerged. I started feeling like I didn't know what was real anymore. Every interaction with management became a potential test or manipulation. It was exhausting trying to figure out what was genuine and what was part of some larger experiment. Update 2. 3 weeks after the picnic incident, everything exploded in a way none of us saw coming. The employee group that had been organizing managed to get in touch with a reporter who specialized in workplace issues. They'd been documenting all the suspicious activities we'd discovered, and apparently our situation was part of a much larger story. It turned out that our company wasn't the only one conducting these kinds of social experiments on employees. There was a whole consulting firm that specialized in workplace behavioral analysis, and they'd been contracted by dozens of companies to run these elaborate tests. The picnic confession was just one of many scenarios they used to study employee responses. When the story broke, it went viral in a way that completely shocked everyone. Social media exploded with people sharing their own experiences of weird workplace situations that suddenly made sense in this new context. The hashtag that emerged around it started trending nationally. Jennifer called an emergency all-hands meeting the day after the article came out. This time, there was no doubt about whether she was being genuine or not because she looked absolutely panicked. The confident, controlled person we'd known was completely gone, replaced by someone who seemed to be barely holding it together. She tried to do damage control, explaining that the experiments were designed to improve workplace culture and employee satisfaction. She insisted that the data collected was being used to make positive changes, not to punish anyone. But nobody was buying it anymore. The most shocking revelation came when someone in the back of the room stood up and identified themselves as one of the consultants who'd been embedded in our workplace for months. They'd been hired as a regular employee but were actually there to observe and report on our behavior. They apologized and said they were coming forward because they couldn't live with the deception anymore. That's when I realized just how deep this whole thing went. This person had been in meetings with us, eaten lunch with us, even come to some of our after-work social events. They'd been collecting data on our personal relationships, our stress levels, our reactions to various workplace situations. It felt like such a complete betrayal of basic human decency. The legal implications started becoming clear pretty quickly. Several employees contacted lawyers about potential privacy violations and emotional distress claims. The company's stock price started dropping as investors worried about the negative publicity and potential lawsuits. But the strangest part was how it affected my own sense of reality. I kept thinking about all the conversations I'd had with the undercover consultant, all the times I'd shared personal information or complained about work situations. Had any of my genuine emotions and experiences been respected, or was I just a subject in their study the whole time? The stress of not knowing what was real started affecting my sleep, my relationships outside of work, even my physical health. I'd wake up in the middle of the night wondering what other aspects of my life might be somehow artificial or manipulated. Some of my coworkers handled it better than others. A few people seemed to find the whole thing fascinating from a psychological perspective. Others were so angry they were talking about quitting immediately. I was somewhere in the middle, feeling betrayed but also weirdly curious about what they'd learned from studying us. Final update. The resolution to this whole situation was nothing like what anyone expected. About 6 weeks after everything came to light, we got news that completely changed the narrative again. The consulting firm that had been running these experiments was actually part of a much larger investigation. Federal authorities had been tracking companies that were conducting unauthorized psychological research on employees, and our situation had helped them build a case against multiple organizations. Jennifer, it turned out, had been cooperating with the investigation for months. Her decision to reveal the experiment at the picnic wasn't part of the original plan. She'd gone rogue because she couldn't handle the guilt anymore. The consulting firm had threatened her job when she tried to end the program earlier. This revelation reframed everything we thought we knew about what had happened. Jennifer hadn't been the mastermind. She'd been almost as trapped in the situation as we were. The real decision-makers were people we'd never met, working for a company we'd never heard of. The legal consequences were severe. The consulting firm faced massive fines and several of their executives were criminally charged. Our company received a significant settlement that was distributed among all employees who'd been affected by the experiments. But the money didn't fix the emotional damage. The trust that had been broken wasn't something that could be repaired with a settlement check. Many people ended up leaving the company anyway, unable to feel comfortable in an environment where they'd been deceived so thoroughly. I decided to stay, partly because I needed the job security and partly because I was curious to see how things would change. Jennifer stepped down as CEO but remained with the company in a different role. She spent months having individual conversations with employees, trying to rebuild relationships and explain her perspective on what had happened. The weirdest part of the aftermath was how it changed my understanding of workplace dynamics in general. I became much more aware of how much observation and analysis happens in any job, even without formal experiments. The line between normal management oversight and invasive monitoring seemed much blurrier than I'd ever realized. Our new leadership implemented policies requiring transparency about any data collection or behavioral analysis. They brought in independent oversight to ensure that employees were treated as people rather than research subjects. But the paranoia never completely went away. 6 months later, I still sometimes catch myself wondering if unusual situations at work are genuine or part of some new test. The experience taught me to pay attention to my instincts when something feels off, but it also made me question my instincts because they'd failed me so completely during the original situation. The strangest long-term effect was how it changed my relationships with my coworkers. The people I went through this experience with felt like family in a weird way. We'd been through something surreal together, and that created a bond that transcended normal workplace friendships. Looking back, I think the most valuable thing I learned was about the importance of genuine human connection in professional environments. The manipulation we experienced was so effective because it exploited our natural desire to care about each other and support our colleagues during difficult times. The violation of that trust showed me how precious authentic relationships really are, both at work and in life generally. It made me more intentional about creating real connections with people and more protective of the vulnerability that makes those connections possible. The whole experience was traumatic, but it also taught me things about human nature, corporate power, and personal resilience that I probably wouldn't have learned any other way. I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I'm not sure I regret having lived through it either. The company is different now, and so am I. Whether those changes are ultimately positive remains to be seen, but at least they're real in a way that nothing felt real for those few months when we were unknowingly living in someone else's experiment.